This is much more than simply a large Super 6. When I first saw this at Super Booth last year, I mistakenly assumed it was simply a 5-octave version of the Super 6 with more voices and a poly aftertouch keyboard. I was wrong. It's actually a Super Gemini, or Gemini to our American friends, with a single bank of controls rather than the 2 banks that the Gemini's got and a couple less voices. You could think of the Gemini as a Super 10. Although they're all very similar, if you know one, you pretty much know them all. They're both by Timbrel. We do have 2 layers on this, just like the Gemini, even though there's only 1 set of controls. Plus we've got the ring mod, wave scanning, and a choice of subs. We can have a sine or a square on this. And the performance controls on the left-hand side are slightly different as well. As I say, we've got polyphonic aftertouch on this, which you don't get on the standard Super 6, although there is an upgraded keyboard you can buy for the Super 6, and this is a video showing how to install it. I'll link to that in the description. Starting off with the most obvious one then, and that's the size of the keybed and the keybed itself. 4 octaves versus 5 octaves. This has got the poly aftertouch in. You can see I've got my little ST49 sticker. That's slightly wonky, and I did make a video, as I said in the intro, of me doing that. The big difference I've found with these keybeds actually, and I didn't realize it until I got it home, was that this has got a really nice feel to it. It's a Fatal keybed. When you touch it up here, you don't need any more pressure than you need down here, or very, very little more. Most synth keybeds, when you're touching up here, it's a bit, same with this one as well, it's a bit harder to push it than it is there, and that's because the keybeds, or the keys themselves, only stretch to about there, so the pivot point's quite close to this. Whereas on this, I was really stunned by how easy that is. Just so gentle. And I think this is the best keybed I've got on any of my synths, to be honest. And maybe that's why we've got a bit of a space there. On the Gemini, we do have the ribbon controller, don't we? But maybe we've got a space here because the keys go back a lot further. Perhaps, I don't know, I've not opened it up. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely keybed, this. If you're into playing your synths, no question, get the Super 8 or the Gemini. Of course, you can't hear how gentle I'm playing because I've not got velocity on the dynamics, but anyway, the next thing that you notice when you get them together, I didn't actually notice this until yesterday, even though I've got a Super 6 and I use it a fair amount. I didn't realize that the sliders on this, you've got much more travel in them. These are 30mm or thereabouts, and I measured them at about 45mm. So there's a huge difference, 50% difference there. And I didn't think the Super 8 was small when I was using it. So I went and measured the Jupiter 6, the Jupiter 4, the Juno 60, and they're all the same as this. They're all 30mm, 30 centimeters. That'd be a big slider. Yeah, so these are just like super big. There must be, you know, when I first got the Super 6, I was very impressed by it, but I didn't realize that was one of the reasons. But one of the reasons I like the look of the Super 8 more is because it feels less cluttered. And again, when you get them next to each other, they're not really, the controls are in about the same amount of space. But I think just having the space on the front panel just makes it feel a little bit less cluttered, even though the printing and the text's got a lot more going on the Super 8. Because we've got the additional things like the drift, and that's not printed on the Super 6 because it was only introduced in a firmware update. But yeah, we've got all these little extra boxes and things that you don't really need. You haven't got them on that. Looks quite nice, but there seems to be a lot more going on, but it feels less cluttered. Maybe that's just the size thing. Over here, we've got the performance section. We've got additional slider for the LFO rate, so you can modulate the LFO rate with aftertouch and things like that. Let's try it. Actually, let's go back to an initial patch. So if I turn the LFO rate up, you can hear it speeding up as I push harder. But yeah, although there's a little bit more going on, it doesn't feel any more cluttered. Obviously, you've got the upper or lower switches as well, which you don't have on the Super 6, and you've got upper and lower, and then you've got upper and lower, and you've got upper and lower there. So there are a few more buttons on it, but it does feel, it feels well presented. It's got a really nice interface. It looks the part, and it really does remind me of my Jupiter 6, especially with these little this little grill along the top. So that's enough about the looks of it and how it feels. What about the parameters? Well, if we look at the VCF on the Super 6, we've got track in, on or off, just a 3-position switch for the high pass, whereas on the VCF, it's much more like you get on your Junos and your Jupiters. Yeah, it's a full slider. The Super 6 has got the HADSR envelope, and you've got a slider for the hold. We don't have the slider for the hold on this. We need to use shift, but we also have, as I said earlier, I think, we've got the delay hold as well. We've got a delay hold there. So slightly more complex envelopes, but you don't have the independent slider. Chorus and delay have changed a little bit as well. They've got exactly the same functions, but we've got the delay send on the channel strip, as it were, and that's because on the Gemini you've got 2 of those channel strips, so you've got independent control for the delay sends for each of the channels. On the Super 6 you don't need that, of course. And then down here we've got performance button as well, so we can save performances. Performances contain 2 patches. We've got 128 performances, but we've got 256 patches because we've got an upper and a lower, so you can save the upper and the lower on A and B. Again, A1 to H8 in both of them. So that's 128 performances, and those 128 performances each contain 2 patches. You're not referring to them. That's a pet hate of mine. I think it was a JP8000 and you refer to the patches and then you change the patch and you change another performance. On this, it saves the patches with the performance, but you've got the additional patches as well. So actually in here you'd have, I think it's 512 patches in total. And I think that's about it for the changes on the front. On the back panel, we've got 2 stereo pairs plus the main pair on the Super 8, but we lose the audio input. But we've got a couple of extra inputs for foot controllers. So that just about covers the physical aspects of it and what's different. Let's take a look then at what we've got on the synth architecture. Coming over from the left-hand side, I think all this seems to be the same until we get to the DDS modulator section. And we've got this additional wave function here, and we've got an A and a B. And that's because each patch can load 2 waves or can contain 2 digital waves. So putting this onto a digital wave, going to the wave, we've got wave A and wave B. So wave A is 2 and wave B is C. So changing wave B, and then change wave A. You're not hearing it because I'm changing A, and we're listening to B. And obviously we can modulate that with the LFO or the envelope. Let's just take that modulation off there. And because I didn't read the manual when I first got this, I was trying to change the waves. I'd loaded in some of my Prophet VS waves, wanted to hear them, and I couldn't change the wavelengths because I was listening to A, but putting it into B. So that's something to be aware of. And you can buy my Prophet VS waves, if you like, as well on my starskycar.com website. And if you're not on the digital wave, this slider here modulates between the different wave shapes. So sine to sawtooth, square, sawtooth, square and triangle, triangle, up to noise. So that's a bit similar to things like the Rev 2 and the Prophet 6, where you can modulate between the sine and the sawtooth and the square. And if we're on the PWM wave on DDS2, this works for that. But you'll hear it is also modulating between the wave shapes on DDS1 as well. I've not found a way of making it static on one and modulating on the other. So if you wanted a PWM tone, but you wanted a static sawtooth on DDS1, I've not worked that out yet, if it's possible. Not that it makes much of a difference, just something I've noticed. Still all sounds very nice. Next difference then is the ring mod. If we put DDS2 into ring mod mode, it's now giving us a ring mod. And that's blending through to DDS1. So you don't have the ring mod on the Super 6. I don't know why this is labelled ring mod here, because what it does is it introduces cross mod to the ring mod. So that's cross mod and ring mod. So that's ring mod in oscillator 2's sine. Is it a sine on this? It is now with oscillator 1. I don't think you can modulate the mix parameter. You can on the Super 6. You were able to do that after an update, but I've not managed to do it on this. Go to LFO2. It's not doing it. LFO1. It's not doing it either. So hopefully they'll put that in an update. Yeah, some lovely little tones out of that though, can't you? And while we're on this switch here, if we go to LFO mode on the UDS2, we've got the option of a sine or a square, whereas on the original Super 6, and I think it's just a square on that, but we do have the option of audio in. So no audio in, but we do have a sine or a square on that. Or off when you're back into normal mode. And I did mention earlier the envelopes. I'm not going to play them, but just to reiterate again that there are differences with the envelopes, but I can't think of anything else. So let's just take a look at the differences sonically. Apart from the additional functions, the only thing I've found that's different sonically is that the filter on the Super 8 is a bit more harsh. It's got a lot more resonance to it. And the modulation amount on the filter from the envelope is much greater than it is on the Super 6. When I recorded my original comparison of the Jupiter 6 versus the Super 6, I noticed that the modulation amount wasn't as great on the Super 6 as it was on the Jupiter 6, which meant you just didn't quite get that punch with some tones, whereas on this, it modulates through the whole frequency range. If you look at this frequency analysis here, you can see it moving all the way from beyond 20 kilohertz right down to a massively deep rumble. Whereas on the Super 6, you can see here, it's starting off at around 3 kilohertz, not way up above 20. To get it to start way above 20 and to modulate much more, you have to use both envelope 1 and envelope 2, which I'm doing here. I've tuned the two filters so they're the same cutoff. So we're hitting the full, or we're hitting self oscillation there, about 80%. On this, it's much higher, but when I take it to the top, this is the top on the Super 8. You can see we're getting much more resonance on the Super 8. If I add the drive circuits, just to show you the difference here. So again, a lot more poke on the Super 8. And then put the second drive circuit in. To really pull down that resonance. But we've still got it poking through a bit on the Super 8. Other than that, they sound identical as far as I can tell. So there you have it, the Super 8 versus the Super 6. Very, very similar synths indeed. I would suggest getting the Super 8 if you like playing your keyboards, if you're a two-hander and you've got the space, get the Super 8. And you might want the Gemini as well. I'm not one for using dual layers much, so I'm quite happy with the Super 8. Dual layers just confuse me. I suppose maybe that's because I've only ever had them on things that have got a single panel. Maybe I should have checked out the Gemini. But no, for me, Super 8 is the one. If you have shorter space, Super 6, but essentially very, very similar synths. Dual layers, single layer, and a couple of little extra bits. I wouldn't get the Super 8, I think this is what I'm saying. I wouldn't get the Super 8 just for those little additional parameters. I don't think it's worth it for that, but it's definitely worth it for the hardware. Well, I hope somebody somewhere found that useful. If you did, please think about subscribing, ring the bell, join me on Patreon. The channel is funded by my wonderful patrons who, for less than the price of a dodgy coffee a month, get access to samples, patches, and tutorials. Also, do check out my affiliate links. If you're going to buy one of these, check out the affiliate links because I will get a little kickback, basically. Another thing that helps to support the channel. Also, do take a look at my starskycar.com website. Patches, samples. Oh yeah, and I've got the Profit VS waves for the Super 6, which will work in the Super 8 and the Gemini in there as well. So thanks very much for staying to the very, very end, and I will see you next time.